So picture this. It's July of 1965. And there's this man, he checks himself out of a quiet, very temperate spa in Bavaria over in Germany.
Right. Bad Kissingen, I believe.
Yeah, exactly. Bad Kissingen. And he's suffering from a liver condition. He's totally exhausted. But he just up and boards a plane and flies halfway across the world in absolute secret.
Which is just wild to think about.
It really is.
Yeah.
And his goal is to unilaterally dismantle a country, completely behind his own prime minister's back.
Yeah.
And he's doing it for one specific reason. He wants to save millions of lives from this looming bloodbath.
It is genuinely one of the most astonishing, high-stakes political maneuvers of the entire 20th century.
No.
I mean, it really is. And what's wild is that the official history books, they often just smooth this moment over.
Oh, completely.
They present the founding of modern Singapore as this very clean, inevitable architectural blueprint, drafted by a singular genius.
Right, like classical architecture. You look back at history and you see the grand pillars, the sweeping staircases. And the narrative points to the master architect, Lee Kuan Yew, and basically says, there it is. It was all part of the master plan from day one.
Right, right.
But when you actually step into the unredacted historical records, that beautiful blueprint is just, it's covered in frantic scribbles and crossed out lines.
Secret trapdoors.
Yeah, secret trapdoors. And these really deep, profound moral crises.
Because the clean lines just disappear entirely the moment you read the primary sources. You are suddenly neck deep in historical and moral muddy waters.
And that murky, untold foundation is exactly our mission for today's deep dive. We are exploring the incredible friction at the birth of Singapore. Specifically, we're looking at the collision between raw, utilitarian, political survival on one side.
Which was intense, yeah.
Right, and on the other side, the quiet, deeply held Christian moral convictions that basically acted as a counterweight to all that raw power.
Yeah, to unpack this, we are looking at a fascinating stack of documents today, things that have recently come into focus.
Right, we've got a lot of new material.
We do. We have Thumping Tijan's highly critical 2026 essay, The Albatross File Unredacted, which breaks down these newly declassified government documents.
Super interesting stuff in there.
Absolutely. And we are cross-referencing that with aggregated 2026 research on the faith trajectories of Singapore's early leaders. This draws from deeply personal profiles in Sultan Light, Catholic News Singapore, and some newly examined parliamentary tributes.
Now, before we get into the weeds here, I do need to set a really clear boundary for this exploration.
Yeah, that's important.
Because the sources we are working with today, particularly the Albatross File essay, they contain some highly critical, very politically charged narratives.
Definitely. They pull no punches.
No, they don't. They take direct aim at Lee Kuan Yew's early political strategies and also the ethno-nationalism of UMNO over in Malaysia.
Mm-hmm.
So we are bringing these texts to the table, but I want to be absolutely clear to everyone listening. We are not taking a political side here.
No, not at all.
We are not endorsing these specific views or rendering any kind of modern political judgments on these leaders. Our job today is to impartially report on the historical claims, the declassified documents, and the human dynamics that are presented in these specific texts.
Right. We're just here to examine the forces that shaped this era.
Exactly. We're looking at this strictly as an exploration of strategic friction versus ethical boundaries.
Which really is the most fascinating way to approach it, I think.
So let's jump in. Take me back to the early 1960s. The textbook version of this era, the one we all sort of know, says that the 1963 merger, where Singapore joined Malaya to form Malaysia, was just this natural, logical step.
Right, like an economic necessity.
Yeah, an economic necessity, a security shield against the looming threat of communism in Southeast Asia.
That is the standard narrative. But the Albatross File Unredacted frames it entirely differently. Fundamentally differently.
How so?
Well, the essay argues that presenting the merger as this calm, logical sticksmanship completely strips away the chaotic, terrifying reality of the era. To understand 1961, you have to picture Singapore that is deeply impoverished.
Okay.
It's highly volatile, and politically, it's just fractured. Lee Kuan Yew and his political party, the People's Action Party, or the PIP, they were essentially in free fall at this point.
Wait, free fall? I think most people imagine the PIP as this unstoppable political juggernaut right from day one.
Yeah, but not in 1961. They had ridden into power promising jobs, housing, and true decolonization from the British, right?
Right.
But a couple of years in, the economic picture was incredibly bleak. Unemployment was sky high, and more importantly, the PIP was internally fracturing.
Oh, like a civil war within the party.
Exactly. You had Lee Kuan Yew's faction, which was mostly English-educated and very pragmatic, but then you had this massive, highly mobilized left-wing faction led by figures like Lim Chin-seong.
And they had a lot of power, didn't they?
Huge power. They commanded the loyalty of the Chinese-speaking working class and the really powerful trade unions.
So it's a coalition that's basically tearing itself apart at the seams.
Yeah.
And this culminates in a specific event, right? The Hong Lim by-election.
Yes, in April of 1961. And it wasn't just a loss for Lee Kuan Yew's faction, it was a political earthquake. The PAP fielded a candidate in the Hong Lim constituency, and he was absolutely crushed.
Crushed how badly?
He lost roughly 73% of the vote to a populist named Ong Eng Guan.
73%.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, that's not a defeat. That is a complete repudiation by the voters.
Exactly. It signaled to Lee Kuan Yew that he was rapidly losing his grip on the Chinese-speaking electorate.
Yeah.
I mean, he looked at the electoral math and realized he was staring down the barrel of a general election that he was almost certainly going to lose.
Lose to his own left-wing rivals, essentially.
Yes. He was completely cornered.
Okay, so if you are a brilliant, ruthless political operator and you're backed into a corner, what do? I mean, you change the board, right?
You flip the table.
Right. And according to these unredacted files, he seizes on this concept of merger with Malaya. And he doesn't just see it as a noble national policy, but as the ultimate political wedge issue.
That is the core argument of the essay. Reunification with Malaya had this broad, almost romantic appeal in Singapore.
Right, people like the idea.
They did. So by pushing it aggressively, Lee Kuan Yew forced the left-wing faction into a trap.
I see.
Yeah. Either they supported merger on Lee's terms, which neutralized their unique platform, or they opposed it, and Lee could paint them as anti-reunification, anti-nationalist communists.
It's brilliant, really. But to make this work, Lee had to actually secure the merger with the Federation of Malaya.
Which was not a sure thing.
No, and he had to somehow get his left-wing opposition out of the picture physically or politically.
And this leads to what the source text explicitly calls a Faustian bargain.
Okay, walk me through the mechanics of this. Because reading the declassified records of the Internal Security Council, the ISC, my jaw actually dropped. I couldn't believe what I was reading.
It is stunning. So the ISC was this tripartite body. It was made up of representatives from Britain, the Federation of Malaya, and Singapore.
All right.
And they controlled internal security in Singapore. Now, publicly, Lee Kuan Yew was demanding the release of political prisoners.
Which he kind of had to do, right?
Yeah, this was a core demand of his party's left wing. He had to appear to champion it to keep his working class support. So he would publicly complain that he was being outvoted by the British and the Malayans on the council.
He's playing the victim of colonialism.
Exactly.
But privately, behind closed doors, he is playing a completely different game.
A radically different game. The records show he was privately pressing the British and the Federation to keep the detainees locked up.
Wait, let me make sure I have the sequence of this right. Because it's wild. He tables a formal document calling for the release of his own citizens, his own political allies.
Yes.
And then he leans over to the British and the Malayans.
Yes.
And basically says, please veto the document I just put on the table.
Yes. The text quotes him literally asking the ISC to block his own motion.
Wow.
He did it so that his government wouldn't have to, in his words, soil its hands.
That is insane. I mean, if that had leaked in 1961, his political career would have been over instantly.
In a heartbeat.
He used the colonial power and a neighboring state to do his political dirty work. He amputates his own left wing, all while keeping his hands perfectly clean for the voters.
Yeah.
I mean, that is the definition of raw utilitarian pragmatism.
It is survival at all costs. But here is the massive hurdle he still faced. Even if he outmaneuvers the left wing in Singapore, he still has to convince Tunku Abdul Rahman, the Prime Minister of the Federation of Malaya, to actually accept Singapore into the Union.
And the Tunku initially wanted absolutely nothing to do with Singapore, right?
Nothing at all.
Because of the demographics.
It was pure electoral math, but tied directly to the foundational ideology of the Federation. You see, the dominant political party in Malaya was UMNO, the United Malays National Organization. And UMNO's entire platform was built on a Malay-first ethno-nationalist project. They viewed the nation as the land of the Malays, who had indigenous rights that absolutely needed to be protected.
And suddenly, Lee Kuan Yew is knocking on the door asking them to absorb Singapore, which is this densely populated island of disproportionately Chinese-speaking, left-leaning voters.
Exactly. You have to look at the mechanics of UMNO's power here. They relied on a first-past-the-post electoral system.
What it means.
In that system, you don't need a majority of the total popular vote to control the government. You just need to win the most votes in specific geographic constituencies.
Oh.
And UMNO had carefully balanced those constituencies to ensure Malay rural voters had primacy.
So it's very delicately balanced.
Very. So if you suddenly enfranchise 1 million Chinese voters from Singapore, you introduce a massive new voting bloc.
And they could ally with non-Malays in the Federation.
Exactly. And that would completely dismantle UMNO's arithmetic.
So to UMNO, Singapore isn't this great economic asset. It's a demographic ticking time bomb.
That's exactly how they saw it.
So how on earth do you forge a country out of two entities where one is desperately seeking a lifeboat and the other is terrified the lifeboat is going to sink their ship?
Well, you design a structurally flawed marriage, a compromise built entirely on containment.
Containment.
Yeah. To get the Tunku to agree, Lee Kuan Yew basically accepts a system where Singapore is effectively politically quarantined.
Quarantine how? Like legally?
Yes, constitutionally. They created a system of second-class citizenship for Singaporeans within the new Malaysia.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, if you were a Singaporean citizen, you could only vote and run for political office in Singapore. You could not cross the causeway and run for a seat in Kuala Lumpur.
Whereas a federal citizen had broader rights.
Exactly. And on top of that, Singapore's parliamentary representation in the federal government was artificially reduced. They were given fewer seats than their population actually warranted.
So Lee Kuan Yew, a man who is globally known for his fierce intellect and pride, signs a document agreeing that his own people will be structurally unequal in this new country.
According to the critical analysis in the Albatross File, he accepted this highly discriminatory structure purely out of desperation to save his political skin.
He just needed to survive.
Right. He knew it compromised the equality of his people, but it was literally the only way to get the British and Malaya to move forward, secure the merger, and permanently lock out his left-wing rivals from taking power in an independent Singapore.
Which brings us to the actual marriage. I kind of view it like we transitioned from this desperate compromise wedding in 1963 to an inevitable, incredibly messy divorce.
Yes.
Because almost immediately after the ink is dry, Lee Kuan Yew tries to overturn the very bargain he just agreed to.
It's a fascinating pivot, honestly. He gets what he needs, survival, and then almost immediately realizes the box he is trapped in is intolerable.
Right.
So what happens when a brilliant pragmatist realizes he is playing on a rigged board?
He tries to flip the board.
He engages in highly provocative brinkmanship. Lee Kuan Yew begins campaigning on the slogan of a Malaysian Malaysia, arguing for total racial equality.
Which, I mean, sounds universally noble to a modern ear.
It does, but in the context of 1964 Malaysia, he was directly questioning the fundamental premise of Malay supremacy that the entire federation was built upon.
The same premise he had just implicitly agreed to respect.
Exactly. He started making these racially charged, aggressively brilliant speeches in the federal parliament, basically trying to force UMNO into making concessions or unforced errors.
But I have to push back here on behalf of the listener because it's confusing. Lee Kuan Yew is renowned globally as a master, far-sighted political grandmaster.
Yes, he is.
So if he's so brilliant, how did he so fundamentally misread the room in Kuala Lumpur? Did he really think UMNO would just listen to a logical debate and say, you know what, Lee, you're right. Let's dismantle our foundational ideology today?
That is the blind spot, and it's a crucial one to understand. The sources pull a fantastic quote from Maurice Baker.
Who was he?
He was a close colleague of Lee's who actually grew up in Malaya, and Baker observed that Lee Kuan Yew, quote, never understood the subtleties of Malay conversation.
Wow.
Tu Chin Chai, another founding father, said Lee simply never understood the visceral nature of Malay special rights.
He assumed everyone was playing the same rational, utilitarian game of chess. Like, if he made a superior logical argument, they would just have to concede.
But UMNO wasn't playing rational chess. They were operating on deep historical emotion.
Right.
You have to remember the psychological legacy of colonialism here. The Malays had been colonized, sidelined economically in their own land. For UMNO, the Federation was an emotional vehicle designed to ensure Malays would never be dispossessed or colonized again.
So they were not going to compromise on that existential bedrock for any economic or rational political argument Lee threw at them.
No, never. Lee kept pushing, expecting them to yield logically, but he was basically ramming his head into an emotional wall.
And the friction from that ramming sparks a catastrophe, the 1964 racial riots.
Yes. The political brinkmanship bleeds out of the parliament and onto the streets. The rhetoric creates this incredibly explosive environment, culminating in horrific bloodletting between Malays and Chinese in Singapore.
It was really bad, right?
Awful. People are being killed in the streets, curfews are enacted. It is a total breakdown of civil order.
And the declassified files show that during this period, the pressure actually breaks the pragmatist.
It does. Lee Kuan Yew's psychological state severely deteriorates. The contemporary accounts from the British and his own colleagues describe him as emotionally unstable, physically exhausted, and totally unpredictable.
I read he even took time off.
Yeah, he takes weeks off to recover in a secluded bungalow in Changi, refusing to even take phone calls from his own deputy. The strategy of utilitarian brinkmanship had driven the entire project to the edge of the abyss.
Which is exactly where we introduce the pivot in today's deep dive. We have LKY operating on this raw, amoral pragmatism, pushing the nation toward what looks like an impending civil war.
Yeah.
But while this high-stakes chaos is happening in the foreground, a totally different worldview is quietly operating in the background. We start seeing the profound influence of the Christian moral counterweights within his inner circle.
This is the layer of Singapore's history that rarely gets the spotlight, but it is so essential. If Lee Kuan Yew was the combative strategist willing to risk everything, we need to look at the people acting as the nation's moral anchors. And the first one we absolutely must discuss is the man we left in the Bavarian spa at the beginning, Dr. Keng Swee.
Anyone who knows Singaporean history knows Dr. Goh as the economic architect or the defense architect. He's a legend. But the new research from Salt and Light dives deep into his theological DNA. He wasn't just a technocrat. He was a man with a profoundly deep Methodist heritage.
Deeply rooted. He was born in Malacca, Peranakan, but his family was a huge pillar of the early Christian community.
His uncle was pretty prominent, right?
Yeah, his uncle, Goh Keng, was Singapore's first ordained Methodist minister. Dr. Goh grew up attending the Middle Road Baba Church, where the services were actually held in Malay, so he was steeped in a very strong, structured sense of Christian morality right from childhood.
He fundamentally believed in a firm moral order.
Exactly.
So you have a man who believes in a firm moral order watching his political partner leverage racial violence.
It shook Goh to his core. Lee Kuan Yew, operating as the pure strategist, looked at the 1964 riots and saw something that could be leveraged.
Like a tool.
Right. The logic was, since violence is inevitable in this flawed system, let's manipulate the pressure to force Kuala Lumpur into creating a multiracial Malaysia.
Play a game of chicken.
Yes. But Keng Swee looked at the human cost, the actual bodies on the street, and saw an unacceptable moral tragedy. He was terrified of the impending bloodletting if the brinkmanship continued.
Which brings us right back to our opening hook. It's May 1965. Dr. Goh is suffering from a severe liver flare-up.
Which the text notes was aggravated by massive stress and probably a bit too much beer.
Fair enough. And he retreats to Bad Kissingen in Germany. So picture the isolation here. He's in this quiet, temperate Bavarian town, but trickling in via telegrams and news reports is all this chaos from home.
He's reading about Lee Kuan Yew giving increasingly inflammatory, defiant speeches. He's hearing credible rumors that the federal government in Kuala Lumpur is actually preparing to arrest Lee Kuan Yew.
Or worse. Weren't there assassination rumors?
Yes, rumors that assassination plots are brewing.
So he's sitting thousands of miles away, watching the car accelerate toward a cliff, knowing his friend's foot is taped to the gas pedal.
And after 7 weeks of this, his anxiety just overrides everything. He checks himself out of the spa, cuts his recovery short, and rushes back to Southeast Asia. This is July 1965.
And Goh makes a definitive unilateral move that literally changes history.
He bypasses Lee Kuan Yew entirely.
Wow.
On July 15th, Goh meets secretly with Malaysia's Deputy Prime Minister Tun Abdul Razak. And Razak asks if Goh has any ideas to solve this constitutional crisis.
And what does he say?
Keng Swee, acting purely on his own moral imperative to stop the violence, proposes full separation.
He just offers to cut the cord. Complete independence for Singapore.
Yep.
And Razak just agrees.
Razak immediately favors the idea. It solves UMNO's demographic problem instantly, remember?
Oh, right. The million Chinese voters are suddenly out of the equation.
Exactly. But here is the most astonishing part, the logistical deception that follows.
Right, because he hasn't told LKY he did this yet.
No. Goh returns to Singapore, goes to Lee Kuan Yew and asks for the authorization to go to Kuala Lumpur to negotiate with Razak.
Negotiate in air quotes.
Yes. He deliberately hides the fact that he has already proposed separation and that Razak has already agreed to it.
He presents it as a one game, to use chess parlance. But wait, what were Lee's actual instructions to Go, if he thought Go was just going to negotiate?
Lee's explicit instructions were to negotiate a looser confederation arrangement. Keep them in Malaysia, just change the terms of the deal.
But Go ignores his prime minister.
Completely. He gets Lee to sign a legal pledge honoring whatever agreement Go brings back.
A blank check.
Armed with that blank check, Go executes the final separation.
It's mind-blowing. I mean, when did Lee Kuan Yew actually find out that his trusted deputy had orchestrated the whole thing behind his back?
According to the archives, Lee didn't find out the full truth of the deception until he read Go King Swee's oral history transcripts.
When was that?
In 1994.
What? Almost 30 years later.
Almost 30 years later.
So how do we interpret that? Is it a betrayal or is it a rescue mission?
It is a betrayal of political strategy, definitely. But it is an ultimate act of loyalty to the person and the people. Go Keng Swee betrayed Lee Kuan Yew's tactics to save Lee Kuan Yew from himself.
By forcing the separation, he prevented what he believed was a guaranteed violent conclusion.
Exactly. It's a powerful example of a leader driven by a moral imperative, the preservation of human life, overriding the high-stakes political victory his leader was so obsessed with chasing.
The sources make a really fascinating parallel here. They compare God's quiet intervention to the biblical book of Esther.
It's a very apt comparison. In the book of Esther, you have a figure placed deep in the inner court who quietly subverts the political machinery to save their people from destruction.
Go isn't the loud orator on the stage.
No, he was the man in the back room pulling the plug on a disastrous war before it could truly begin.
Okay, so Dr. Go Keng Swee is the architect of the exit. He gets them out of the burning building. But on August 9th, 1965, Singapore is suddenly an independent nation, cut off from its hinterland, with no natural resources and a terrifying economic future.
It was incredibly bleak.
Right. So who rebuilt the house once they were out?
This brings us to our second moral counterweight. We transition from the heat of political battle and secret negotiations to the quiet, stoic stewardship of the economy. We need to talk about Benedict Han Sui Sen.
Han Sui Sen is such an incredibly fascinating figure in these sources. While I was reading about his economic policies, the best analogy I could think of is that he acted like the ultimate shock absorber for a vehicle traveling over incredibly rocky terrain.
Oh, I like that.
Like Lee Kuan Yew was driving the car at 100 miles an hour, swerving around geopolitical threats, but Han Sui Sen was underneath, quietly absorbing all the kinetic energy so the passengers, the citizens, didn't get whiplash.
The shock absorber is the perfect way to visualize it. Han Sui Sen served as Singapore's finance minister during the most critical growth years from 1970 to 1983.
A tough time to be finance minister.
Their toughest. And he was intellectually brilliant. He actually topped all of Malaya in his senior Cambridge exams as a young man. But his defining characteristic wasn't ambition. It was a profound, almost aggressive humility. And the newly compiled research emphasizes that this humility was rooted entirely in his devout Roman Catholic faith.
The memoir, written by his daughter, which is featured in the Catholic News Singapore source, is incredibly revealing about this. He attended the Sacred Heart Church along Oxley Rise, but he wasn't just, a casual Sunday attendee. His scrupulosity was intense.
The anecdotes show a man who was obsessed with spiritual discipline. His daughter recounts that if the family arrived late for Sunday Mass, even just arriving after the gospel reading had started, he would refuse to stay.
He wouldn't just slide into a back pew and quietly sit down.
Nope. He would make the entire family leave, get back in the car, and drive to a completely different parish just to ensure they heard the complete unbroken service.
That is dedication.
He also maintained a strict adherence to being in a state of grace before receiving communion, participating deeply in the sacrament of confession.
There's also this detail that feels almost cinematic. His daughter joins the Legion of Mary, right?
Yes.
And she writes a letter to the organization's global founder, Frank Duff, over in Ireland. And Duff replies with a specific message for her father.
Duff writes to her, quote, "Tell your father that Our Lady has chosen him to aid her son in looking after the welfare of your country."
That gives me chills. And how does Han react to being told he essentially has a divine mandate over the national economy? Does he go around telling everyone?
Not at all. He just reads it and smiles quietly. He didn't use it to inflate his ego. For Han, the finance ministry wasn't a path to power or personal wealth. It was a literal vocation. Managing the economy was his act of devotion.
And look at the mechanics of what that devotion actually produced. Think about the crisis he faced. In the late 1960s, the British suddenly announced they were accelerating the withdrawal of their military forces from Singapore.
Which was a massive economic shock.
Just huge.
The British military bases accounted for roughly 20% of Singapore's gross national product. Tens of thousands of jobs were tied directly to those bases. It was an economic cliff.
Most finance ministers would panic. They would implement severe austerity or beg for international aid.
Mm.
But Swee, who, by the way, had no formal academic training in economics, his degree was in physics and chemistry, he approaches it with an engineer's calm.
Yes.
He sets up the base's economic conversion department. Walk me through what he actually did there.
He approached the crisis without panic or malice. He looked at the naval base at Sembawang and the Royal Air Force Base at Seletar, and instead of seeing abandoned military assets, he saw ready-made industrial infrastructure.
He saw an opportunity.
He systematically converted the naval docks into commercial shipyards, which sparked Singapore's massive marine industry. He turned the military airfields into civilian aerospace hubs.
It was basically a controlled demolition of the colonial economy, rebuilt into a global capitalist engine. I mean, under his watch, the national reserves grew six-fold, from $3.1 billion to $18.9 billion by 1983.
It's a staggering achievement. But the true value of Swee wasn't just the numbers. It was how he managed the human element, providing the necessary counterweight to Lee Kuan Yew.
Right, the shock absorber effect.
Exactly. We have the declassified text of Lee Kuan Yew's 1983 parliamentary tribute to Han, delivered following Han's death. It is one of the most revealing speeches Lee ever gave.
What does he focus on? Because usually Lee talks about strategy and toughness.
Well, Lee stands in Parliament and explicitly marvels at Han's stoicism. He notes that in decades of high-pressure existential governance, Han never expressed frustration. He never showed malice. He never lost his temper.
Lee even admits in the tribute that Han was sometimes loyal to his subordinates to a fault, absorbing their mistakes rather than punishing them.
Exactly. Think about the contrast. Lee Kuan Yew was defined by a ruthless utilitarian drive. He was publicly willing to break people, fire civil servants, or tear down whole systems to achieve a goal.
He was a hard man.
But Swee operated on an other-centered, faith-driven empathy. He absorbed the terrifying stress of the nation's economic survival without passing that anxiety down the chain of command.
His stabilizing presence was the exact counterbalance required to make Lee's aggressive visions actually function in reality without just burning out the entire civil service.
Spot on.
So we have the pragmatist pushing the accelerator and the moral steward acting as the shock absorber. But so far, we've seen faith act as a secret intervention with Swee and a silent, stoic stewardship with Swee. What happens when religious morality stops being quiet? What happens when it directly, publicly collides with the power of the state?
That is the ultimate ethical clash, and it's the climax of the documents we are analyzing today. The sources first established the philosophy of this kind of ethical boundary through Lim Xiongguan, who was Lee Kuan Yew's principal private secretary.
Right. The research highlights Lim's belief that his steadfast faith in a loving God is what sustained him through terrifying crises, like managing the fallout of the 1991 Singapore Airlines hijacking. He championed a concept he called other-centered leadership.
Which is a beautiful philosophy.
Yeah.
But as you might wonder, does it hold up against the raw power of the state?
It's one thing to be other-centered in a crisis. It's another to stand up to the boss.
Exactly. And the answer to that comes from Dhanabalan, one of Singapore's most powerful cabinet ministers, during a massive domestic crisis known as the 1987 Marxist conspiracy, or Operation Spectrum.
For our listeners who aren't familiar with the deep lore of 1980s Singapore, what was Operation Spectrum?
In 1987, the internal security apparatus, the exact same machinery Lee Kuan Yew maneuvered around back in 1961, arrested 22 people. They were mostly young, English-educated professionals, and many of them were Catholic social workers.
Okay.
The government accused them of being involved in a Marxist conspiracy to subvert the state.
And the crucial detail here is how they were arrested, right?
Yes, they were arrested under the Internal Security Act, the ISA.
Which is a very specific type of law.
It is a powerful piece of legislation that allows the government to detain individuals indefinitely without trial.
Without trial, so no day in court.
No day in court. It is the ultimate tool of state security.
Now, enter Dhanabalan. He is a convert from Hinduism to Brethren Christianity. And his core philosophy of public service was that a leader must always be prepared to, quote, let go of the privileges of office. You cannot be captured by the allure of power.
Dhanabalan is in the cabinet when Operation Spectrum goes down. He is presented with the intelligence. He examines the evidence against these social workers. He examines his own conscience, and he reaches a devastating conclusion.
What does he decide?
He decides he cannot morally stomach the use of the ISA in this specific instance. He believes it crosses an ethical line.
And he actually walks the walk. He does the thing so few politicians ever do. He resigns from his powerful cabinet position.
He just walks away. He proves that his moral boundary wasn't just theoretical, it was actionable.
So here is the core conflict of the entire deep dive. How does Lee Kuan Yew, the ultimate pragmatist who spent 30 years building the state apparatus, react to his top minister resigning over a moral objection to state security?
The online citizen source documents this perfectly, pulling from Lee's own reflections. Lee Kuan Yew explicitly dismissed Dhanabalan's resignation. He waved off the moral objection entirely, stating that Dhanabalan had taken a Christian view rather than a hard-headed political view.
A Christian view versus a hard-headed political view. Let's really unpack that phrasing because it feels like the clearest distillation of the ideological battle that built modern Singapore. What does Lee mean by a hard-headed political view?
He is summarizing the utilitarian pragmatism that kept Singapore alive in 1961, 1964, and 1965. In the hard-headed view, the survival and security of the state supersedes absolutely everything else.
No exceptions.
No exceptions. If you perceive a threat, even a potential one, you eliminate it preemptively. The ends justify the means. Individual liberty is completely secondary to collective security.
But the Christian view, as embodied by Dhanabalan, demands a hard stop.
Yes. It asserts an absolute ethical boundary on the state's power over human beings. It argues that there are objective rights and wrongs, regardless of political convenience or security paranoia. For Dhanabalan, state power was secondary to integrity.
Think about the corporate leaders or politicians you see in the news today. How often do you see someone willingly step down, abandoning immense power and prestige, simply because a policy crosses an internal moral line?
It's incredibly rare.
By resigning, Dhanabalan proved that the moral counterweights in Singapore's early leadership weren't just seeking private comfort in their faith. They were imposing an actionable limit on how far the government was allowed to go.
It's incredible when you pull all these threads together. The unredacted, comprehensive history of this era shows that modern Singapore was absolutely not built by a lone, infallible pragmatist playing 4D chess.
Not at all. The nation survived its brutal foundational years precisely because Lee Kuan Yew's highly aggressive, sometimes immoral political gambits were anchored, checked, and sometimes actively subverted by the quiet, unyielding moral compasses of his inner circle.
Leaders like Keng Swee, who broke the rules and deceived his boss to prevent a war and save lives.
Yeah?
Leaders like Han Swee-sen, who absorbed the terror of economic collapse and rebuilt the country as an act of quiet, stoic devotion.
And leaders like Dhanabalan, who drew a line in the sand against the overreach of state power.
Exact.
The friction between those two forces, ruthless, hard-headed survival, and a deep-seated moral order, that is the true, messy, beautiful foundation of the country.
It is the tension that held the building together.
Which leaves us with a lingering question, something for you to ponder long after you take your headphones off today. We've talked about the murky waters of history and these complex blueprints. So think about this. If the creation of a nation requires the ruthless, hard-headed pragmatism of a strategist just to survive the initial violent shocks of birth, but its soul and its long-term stability require the unshakable Christian view of its stewards to prevent the nation from destroying itself from the inside out, which of these forces is actually the true founding father of the nation?
That is the ultimate question at the heart of these archives.
Something to mull over. Until next time, keep diving deep.